Greetings from Columbia Business School, Executive Education. My name is Scott Gardner, and I'm here today with Professor Noel Capon for today's webinar, Strengthening Key Account Relationships Through Effective Senior Management. Before I introduce Noel, I'd like to just go over a few quick logistics. If you look on the next slide, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you. If you'd like to tweet about this webinar, please do so at #CBSExecEd. And finally, most importantly, please submit those questions to the Q&A box and we'll get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. It's my pleasure to introduce Noel Capon. He is the R.C. Kopf Professor of International Marketing and former chair of the Marketing Division at Columbia Business School in New York. He is one of the world's leading marketing educators and global leader in key strategic and global account management. He designs and directs numerous educational programs in marketing and account management for Columbia Business School and business organizations globally. Professor Capon has published more than 80 refereed articles and book chapters and more than 40 books in multiple languages. His most recent book, Customers Win, Suppliers Win, Lessons from one of IBM's most successful strategic account managers, will be published later this year by Wessex Press, wessexlearning.com, a publishing company he founded in the early 2000s. Noel, it's great to see you today. I'm going to leave the stage and I will rejoin you in the last 10 minutes.
Okay, Scott, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. Let me thank also Columbia Executive Education for letting me talk about the work that Christoph Sen and I have done. Thanks also to Harvard Business Review who agreed to publish it. And thanks to all of you who are giving up some valuable time this morning to listen to what I have to say. We'll get on to the topic of the webinar. But first of all, I want to level set, just make sure we're on the same page before I go on. So on the screen, you'll see what I call the fundamental business model. And if you could focus, first of all, on the green background in the middle, what I consider the operating job of management is to make current profits today, promise profits in tomorrow. If you do a good job of that, then the organization will survive and grow, and all things being equal, shareholder value will increase. Or to say the reverse, if we don't make profits today or profits tomorrow, ultimately we go out of business, and of course shareholder value rapidly goes to zero. So how do we make those profits? Well, no matter what business we're in, no matter what our underlying technology is, no matter what country we're in, the core issue is we've got to attract, retain, and grow customers. Because after all, customers are the only entity that bring in cash into the organization other than shareholders and debt holders. How do we do that job of securing customers? Well, we deliver customer value, and we do that by securing capital and human resources, incurring costs, and making investments. Now, the only problem with that model is that there's something missing, and what's missing is that there's some other guys trying to do the same thing. If you do a better job than your competitors in attracting, retaining, and growing customers, then good things happen. If, on the other hand, the competitors do a better job than you, then we know what happens. Now, we are operating in a B2B world. That's the focus of this discussion. And generally, there's some form of 80-20 rule going on, the so-called Pareto distribution. And what that means, and I'm sure we all know, is that there's a skewed distribution on revenue generating, that a large percentage of revenue comes from a small number of customers. So this is 80-20. Yours may be 80-20, it could be 70-30. It could, on the other hand, be 90-10 or even 95-5. Just a large number of, a large amount of revenue comes to a relatively small number of customers. So we could actually restate that business model there in the middle block in the yellow is that what we have to do is attract, retain, and grow strategic customers. These are the major customers that you believe are going to be the future of the organization moving forward. They may be the ones you have today bringing in the big revenue, but they may be ones in the future because, as we all know, the world is changing so fast on so many dimensions. The way we do that is by delivering value. Delivering value to customers. And so the question on the table for this webinar is, what role does senior management, the senior executives, play in that process? Over and above what account managers can do, key account managers, typically we call those in Europe strategic account managers, typically the term in the United States. In addition to what we do, what can senior management do to in a sense, enhance the value that we're offering, or allow customers to be more to understand that in fact that value will be delivered? Because after all, we're in the business of making promises, and customers need to know that those promises will be kept. So let me start this off with two vignettes. Robert and Samuel. Robert is European. He works for a large European company, a manufacturing company, and he's a pretty new hire. He's been brought in at a senior level in the organization. He's been there, 6 weeks, a couple of months, something like that. Meeting people, trying to figure out how the organization works, that sort of thing. Somewhere along the line, someone says, "Hey, Robert, what you should really do is go and see a couple of our customers." Robert thinks it's a good idea. His secretary makes some calls, and he has an appointment, and off he goes to see a couple of customers. So one customer he goes to, he basically has a good time. This is a good introduction to the customer. They're very pleased to see him. They don't see people at such a senior level terribly often. They make him feel very welcome. And there's a good meeting of the minds, good conversations about their joint supplier customer business. Towards the end of his visit, one of the senior executives and the customer says, "Hey, Robert, one of the issues that we have is that we get spikes in demand. And that's always then a problem for us then to get our supplies. And what would really help us is if your company were able to set aside some part of your production facility just for us, so that when these spikes come, there's already supply sort of in the works for us. So we'll reduce our risk, reduce uncertainty." Robert says, "Not a problem. That seems absolutely reasonable. I understand the issue. I'll take care of it." A couple of days later, Robert's in a senior executive meeting at the company. One of his colleagues says, "Hey, he went off to see customer X the other day." Robert says, "Yeah, that's right. I had a very good meeting." The executive says, "Well, let me guess. That whole issue of setting aside production capacity for that customer came up, I guess." And Robert said, "Oh yeah, it came up. That's right. Towards the end of my meeting, I said it wouldn't be a problem. I'd take care of it." The executive said, "You said what? That always comes up. We just absolutely cannot do it. There are all sorts of reasons we cannot do it. You have to go back and tell them that promise has got to be rescinded." Not a good result. Samuel is Sam Palmisano. Merck, one of IBM's customers, has decided it's going to outsource its data center. A lot of companies have done that in the last 15, 20 years. The procurement division, the procurement operation has to make the choice. They send out their RFP, get some responses, go through their process, and they make the decision that the best company to be the outsourced supplier is Accenture. A week later, Sam Palmisano, CEO of IBM, flies in, has a meeting with the Merck CEO. IBM gets the business. So two very, very different results from senior executive involvement. So what I'm going to do now is talk about the types of senior executive involvement that we do in fact see. But when I'm doing that, what I want you to do, if you're in the account management business side of the house, I want you to think about what do your senior executives do? How do they fit in to this framework I'm going to talk about? And if you are a senior executive on this webinar, how do you interface with customers? And furthermore, how do your senior colleagues interface with customers? Because I think the answers to those questions may well lead you, if you buy the model that Christoph and I came up with, to think about some modifications in the way the company behaves. So the first role of interfacing with customers is that you don't. What we call not my problem. Harvard wanted to call it hands off, but basically you don't have anything to do with customers. You take the view, the senior management takes the view is that different functions have their own jobs to do. R&D has their own job to do. R&D should focus on R&D, HR on HR, finance on finance, whatever. Sales area should be focused on by the salespeople. So what we have is basically no customer contact. The motto is almost like let the sales force do its job. We have a good HR department. Their job is to hire the best people in a salesperson level, account manager level, the managers or the leaders of those functions. We do what we can to improve people. We have training programs. If that's not working, then we got to get some different people. We got to change the people or change the people. And the sort of assumption is that each function is equivalent. What R&D and finance and HR and sales are all equivalent. And I have a problem with that. And the problem is that if R&D doesn't do its job, then what happens is some new product is late or something like that. Not a good outcome, but some new product is late. If HR is not doing its job, then maybe someone isn't getting hired. If finance doesn't do its job, maybe the budgets aren't getting prepared or sent out to people who might want to use them. If sales or account management doesn't do its job, the firm doesn't get revenues. At the end of the day, nobody gets a paycheck. So even though each of those functions is very important to the future of the organization, I think the sales and account management function is a little bit, quote, more equal than others. So the results then are there's no trust building between senior management and customers. There's no support. If sales is having trouble, there's no support coming in. And I think you've got a sort of internally centric organization rather than a customer centric organization. So I think there's a real problem there. And I think we'll see that in some of the results in just a second. I believe there are two different roles that can be played by senior management. One, I'm going to call relationship building. On the one hand, I mean, there's been a bit of controversy in the sales area the last few years, but that pretty much most people believe that building strong relationships is very important. And secondly, there's revenue generating. So I'm going to say that there's making this into a 2x2 matrix. And managers like 2x2 matrices. I think they're very valuable. Either the interactions are about relationship building or they're not. And either they're about revenue generating and they're not. If we put yes and no on those two X and Y axes, we end up with four different roles that senior management can play. So let's start with the loose cannon role down there at really not really focused on relationship building and not really focused on revenue generating. And the best example is really quite poignant that came to me a few years ago. I was doing a seminar with account managers for one of the Indian outsourcing companies based in either Hyderabad or Bangalore, India. And during a break, this young man came up to me. He was an account manager. Had a major account. And he said he was very pleased, listen to what I had to say. He was pleased I had come that day because maybe he wouldn't be there in a month. And I asked him why. He said, well, he was thinking of quitting because of what had happened. And I said, what had happened? And the story is the following. A senior executive in head office in Bangalore had a daughter who was at college in Chicago. He wanted to see the daughter. Business class airfare from Bangalore or Hyderabad to Chicago is pretty expensive, plus a hotel room. On the other hand, if on the Friday he saw a couple of customers, saw his daughter at the weekend and saw a couple of customers on the Monday, that would be a business expense. A business expense he could charge that off legitimately. It was nobody's business what he did at the weekend. This had occurred. A week or so afterwards, the account manager figured out what had happened, and it had been a disastrous visit. Put the relationship back a year, was going to impact his income, so he was thinking of taking off, going somewhere else. So what you often find is the senior executives making unsound agreements, creating a poor impression, and actually damaging a customer relationship. And what they don't do very often is get a briefing ahead of time, so they really don't know what they're getting into on the one hand, and on the other hand, they often don't debrief. Now, most account managers I talk to have experience with this. The term is often used as a seagull. The seagull flies in, makes a deposit, flies off, never goes back to the same spot. And I remember Christoph and I were talking to a senior account manager, executive in account management at a Canadian company a number of years ago, and talking about this topic. He said, "Oh, listen, we don't have one seagull; we have a whole flock of them. This can be a real problem." Social visitor, so not focused on revenue generation, but focused on relationship building. And I think the sort of classic case of this would be at the trade show, the annual trade show. You're there at the trade show with a lot of the sales and account management people at the trade show. And then someone during that week or 2 weeks, you host a party. You host a party for senior customer executives. And you bring in senior executives from your company, maybe even the CEO, and they work the crowd. I mean, I sort of think about Bill Clinton had this tremendous reputation for, if you were at one of the events that he was at, that after you talked to him, you thought that you were the most important person in the world that Clinton was talking about. So I'm talking of that sort of event, or it could be going to a sporting event. Could be lots of different things. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. That's really positive. But the issue is there something missing? Will the customer executives that somewhere down the road say, "Hey, oh, this is great. We really like meeting these senior executives from our supplier, but couldn't there be more?" When I think of that, I think of John Chambers at Cisco, who, before he retired, in 1 month, talked to 200 CEOs of his customers. Serious business conversation. He did them over using Cisco's telepresence system, but clearly very concerned and very focused on business relationships. So nothing wrong with social visitor, but what could be more? Could there be more? Deal maker, heavy, not so much focused on the relationship, but very heavily focused on a deal. That's the San Palmisano vignette. One of my students worked at Goldman. He said when Henry Paulson was head of Goldman, he was delivered each week a list of what deals were going to close in his customers that week, and then would make a series of calls or maybe a visit to work on that. Idiosyncratic, what it does is engages significant revenue opportunities, helps the customer make quote the right decision, and signals very strong relationship, very strong support for that customer. what it does not do is support a sales strategy. And I think the issue for securing revenues, and clearly it's great to get those revenues that might have been lost. And we've come across, Christoph and I come across cases where like the Merck Palmazono case, but even cases where the customer signed a contract and had to fork out some penalty clause where they changed their mind. Can be very positive, but I don't think, Christoph, I don't think that can be sustainable. Which sends us then up to the growth champion, which is the place where I think you really want to be, where you want to build strong relationships, and you also want to focus on revenue generation. So you show a robust time investment and engagement. You're sort of building up a customer relationship, not at the account manager level, which is very, very, very important, but even over and above that, because after all, senior executives can make commitments. Commitments from the company, from the supplier, that are just not possible by the account management. And you develop regular meetings, not necessarily terribly frequent, but regular, but in-depth business discussions. And what they don't do is minimize the importance of customer relationships and customers. They bring it to the fore. So that's the framework. There's the other companies where it's not my problem, a significant number. These are the four different categories you talked about. And then in terms of results, so we did a study, Christoph did most of the data collection here. It was in a number of seminars for account managers. We gave the account managers some questionnaires so we could figure out which category their senior executives fit into. In fact, we asked them to identify the most senior executive who would reasonably talk to customers, be involved with customers, then classified them, and then did some measurement on compound annual growth rates. And so that's what we come up with. As you see there on the left, the not my profit is basically flat. Then through the loose cannon over to the growth champion. Now, we can't do the experiment in terms of having people behave in a certain way. So it's a sort of natural experiment. I'm not sure I would hang my career on these numbers, but they're certainly in the right direction. And I think they tell a story that I think means that companies has really got to look at that issue, this issue, and making sure that they're securing the value that their senior executives can bring to their most strategic, most important customers. Okay, so let me hold it there. I hope I've given you a sort of a snapshot overview of what Christoph and I did. And if you want to know more about that, well, we'll do as an ad. We're going to do a program at Columbia in the fall, and you've got the Harvard Business Review article. So Scott, back to you.
Thank you so much, Noel. A lot of great questions came in, so let's get to those. I want to kick it off with a question from Yvette, who asks, what practices and policies enhance management involvement in account management?
Okay, well, I think that my quick answer to that would be to seriously consider an executive sponsor program. So what you do first of all identify the customers that you're prepared to give this extra resource to. And then what you do is you take your senior managers and pair those with account managers. Typically, the senior executive will be 2 or 3 levels above the account manager, maybe 2 or 3 levels above the sort of head of the account management program. They have 2 roles. One role is to work with the account manager. And when I say work with, I mean, and I seriously mean, quote, end quote, work for. The senior executive works for the account manager. In other words, the account manager's job is to manage the account. If the account manager believes that there are some issues that need to be resolved at a very senior level, then the account manager, the senior executive comes in. I remember meeting with the chief legal officer at Siemens. It was an American. He happened to live in the US. He was the executive sponsor for Siemens at Dow Chemical. And he told me in a meeting, he said, I work for Don. I work for the account manager. Sometimes, occasionally, I will have meetings that Don is not in attendance. But I am brought. If Don asks me to come, I will come. I don't go that often, but I go from time to time. That's external. The other value that that person at that level can bring is help the account manager to find their way through the organization. Let me give you an example. It's a few years ago now. The account manager is an IBM account manager. His customer was Merrill Lynch. He had on his staff a person who was exceptionally, or a technical person, exceptionally good working with the sort of issues that Merrill Lynch dealt with. But IBM had a mandatory layoff. It was, in the early 90s when things were really pretty bad at IBM, and this guy was going to be laid off. That would have seriously affected the relationship with Merrill Lynch, because this guy really knew a bunch of stuff. The account manager went to his executive sponsor. The executive sponsor said, "Look, I cannot countermand this layoff decision, which has come from corporate. What I can do is allow you to hire this guy as a consultant, and if you have to, you can come off my budget." So I think there are the two parts of what the executive sponsor can do. One is external, but also a very important one is internal. The executive sponsor programs, a number of companies have put them in. I don't think they're a panacea. There can be problems. Maybe the executive sponsor doesn't get on with the account manager, that sort of thing. So there may have to be some marriage counseling, may have to be divorce from time to time. But I think that's something I would really advise thinking about, because I know from Siemens, I know from IBM, I know from other companies, it's been a major positive effect.
Great, thank you. With your permission, I would like to ask if we could go maybe like 5 minutes over, Noel.
Sure, of course.
I think there's a lot of good questions, and I have a few more I'd like to get to. So, okay. Clinton, he's an entrepreneur in Kenya. He just says, in your opinion, do these principles of account management apply to global business?
Oh, absolutely. And I think this is an area where companies get into real trouble, and some they're leading the way in changing that. Here's the problem. The problem is that when companies go global, what they typically do is they form geographic divisions, so that for the average average US company, for example, they might have North America might be a division or a region, Latin, Central and South America might be a region, EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Africa may be a division, Asia Pacific may be a division, and maybe one for the Indian subcontinent. So we do that, and the people that run those divisions, these are senior guys. I mean, these are regional heads of geographic areas, and their job is to allocate their resources to do the best they can in their regions. The problem is that customers say, "I want to talk to one person. I want to talk to one person who can make decisions." And so the quote global account manager has to work across those different geographic regions, but the geographic regions may be very strong. So what you have to do is to develop a different program where the global accounts are sort of some level of dealt above the regional level, and companies have global account organizations. IBM had one, for example, I think it still has one, where global account managers made decisions across the globe, in effect, could overman what came up from the division. So global account management, yes, it's very in essence, we've got the same issue as we're dealing with customers, and we in the same sort of way. But the problem is organizational, and there's some ways through that. I've got a lot of experience with that. But the simple answer to the question is yes.
Great. All right. Next question is from Kevin. He said he recently had to hire a sales manager to accompany an account manager to see if we could increase sales. But his question is, do you have any advice on how you can convert an account manager who is customer focused, but doesn't exhibit a passion for sales?
Well, I think that's a problem. Someone in the, I mean, there's the, what we often find is this issue of hunters farmers, and what you sort of talking about is one of the farmers who's happy to sort of keep things going. I think what you want is people that are hungry. So one way to do that is with compensation systems, obviously. But if you've got people that are not really hustling for revenue, ultimately you got to change the people. You got to change the people at the end of the end of the day. I mean, that's a sort of harsh thing to have to say, but if you're not successful on the sales side, ultimately no one gets a paycheck. So you've got to make sure that you get the best people in there. Now you've got to do the training, not only just training but also coaching. So I think there's a big role for frontline sales managers, and you may have seen down here on the right, I think, my book on frontline sales managers, where we address the issue of what that frontline sales manager could do. At some level, I firmly believe that in a regular sales force, the most important role in that sales force is a frontline sales manager. It's one of the most difficult roles because they're sort of caught in the middle between the customers and the salespeople on the one hand, stuff coming up from the bottom and stuff coming down from the top. So it's not easy. But you've got to have sales managers who are prepared to get their hands dirty if it's necessary. You've got to do the coaching. You've got to be with their people from time to time. But you've got to develop a passion. If the passion isn't there, then you've probably got the wrong person in the job.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's take two more questions. The next one is from Shannon. She asks, do you have any advice on how you can help executives shift their senior management role? For example, if you have an executive more in the social visitor space, how do you move them to be a growth champion?
Okay, let me tell you what happened in one company. This is a vignette I got from Christoph, who was working with senior management in a company on the account management area, meeting with the executive committee. So this included the CEO and other senior executives, and gave them this sort of little questionnaire we put together in order to identify what role they were playing, whether it was a growth champion or a loose cannon or whatever. They were surprised at the results. So unpleasantly surprised at the results. So they did not have people in the growth champion area, or as many of them as they ought to. So I think somehow you've got to get to senior management. And anyone who wants to email me, I can send them a copy of the questionnaire we did. And let them know where they stand, and start talking about some ways to interact. And we've come across companies that have really developed protocols for how senior executives interface with companies, and have rules that a senior executive cannot go to visit a customer unless certain things happen. And one of those things to happen would be like getting a briefing from an account manager. Account manager, many times it's good for the account manager to be there, but sometimes obviously it's not. So someone has got to get, and I think it's be the responsibility of your head of account management to get to the CEO to figure out what roles are being played, and then set in some protocol of how to do it. And we've seen that happen. That can be very successful. But it's got to come from the top. It's got to come from the top.
All right. All right. So one final question. Just quickly, we've got like 1 minute left.
Right.
Touched on it in your presentation. What should they do today? How do they keep the energy going? What next?
Keep the energy going is I think it almost goes back to the question that was just asked, to identify what senior executives are doing. If they're social visitors, then try to persuade them to get in and have some more detailed conversation. If they're loose cannons, then you've really got a problem and got to change that. I think think about implementing an executive sponsor program. I think that's well worth thinking about. As I say, it's no panacea. There are a lot of issues with that, but overall, the companies that I know that have put in those programs have been felt very positive about what they've done.
Great. Thank you so much, Noel. As always, it was great to work with you today. On behalf of Columbia Business School Executive Education, Professor Capon and myself, we wish you a good and healthy day. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.